Okay, so this is going to be our review over the early republic. So the early presidents, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. So we're going to move quickly, but you can go back and watch any parts that you need to, hear again or focus on a little more closely. I will highlight some of the most important parts here. I'm not going to hit every detail. All right, so Washington, when he comes into the office, he has to deal with the problems of our new nation. We had significant issues, which is why we decided we needed a new constitution and not just the Articles of Confederation. One of those biggest problems was debt and paying off the war debt. There was other issues that had to be dealt with, but the war debt and how that was going to be accomplished was a big question. And ultimately, the answer to that question ended up leading to some additional problems. Okay. So he sets, as president, as first president, he set a lot of examples. One of the biggest ones, is most important of those, is this idea that America would be neutral, especially when it comes to fighting between Great Britain and France, because they're fighting all the time, and we do not need to get involved in their conflicts because that's going to drag us into war all the time. We can't afford it. We don't have the military to really to do that, and so we don't want to be a part of that. It's better for America to stay out of their wars. This would include other wars, but they were the two main problems and two most likely to drag us into a war. And then how are we going to deal with the financial problems, the big debt? Well, George Washington puts a brilliant man, Alexander Hamilton, in charge of kind of doing that, solving that problem. He's the Secretary of the Treasury, and he says he really comes up with a four-part plan: repay the debt, establish a national bank, tax whiskey, and create a protective tariff. So to repay that debt, he also wants to repay the states' debts to get them out of debt and get them in better financial standing. Some states like that, others don't. The big issue, the big problem is going to be this national bank. And this is going to be the big fight. And ultimately, this will be what leads to the two different parties. This will be the conflict that kind of brings those differences out. All right, let's talk about the Whiskey Rebellion. So after the whiskey tax is passed, there's a lot of farmers that aren't able to pay some of their taxes. They feel like it's not fair because it ends up taxing smaller businesses at a higher rate than bigger businesses, and they didn't have the cash to pay it, but so they start to rise up and protest, and Washington sends the army to put that rebellion down, and order is restored fairly quickly, which is an interesting juxtaposition to or comparison that you can make to Shays' Rebellion, where it lasted longer, seemed more bigger problem. This one was handled a little bit more quickly and put down a little bit more forcefully. Washington's farewell address is significant because he says, hey, watch out for political parties and permanent alliances. We need to be neutral. That's the two big things that his farewell address talks about, and there's often question about those about his farewell address. Okay, so the beginning of political parties. We've got two political parties, ultimately at that time, Federalist and the Democratic Republicans. In Washington's cabinet, we have Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton and Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. Well, Hamilton is the leader of the Federalist Party. Jefferson is the leader of the Democratic Republicans, and the big disagreement they have is on power of the federal government. Hamilton believed in a more powerful federal government. Jefferson did not, and so therefore those differences, time and time again, when there was a question of government and what the government should do, there was disagreement over how it should be handled between these two men. The biggest of those was that question of the national bank. So let's talk a little bit about the Federalist Party. They wanted a strong federal government, emphasis on manufacturing, believed in the rule by wealthy and educated. They were more pro-British. The British were our biggest trading partner, and so that tended to influence their thinking there. They believed in a loose interpretation of the Constitution. In other words, if the Constitution doesn't say you can't do it, then you've got a reasonable argument that you should be able to do it. And that would include something like a national bank, and that was the first big fight. And then protective tariffs to help American industry grow. So that's kind of the Federalist Party. Who was the leader of the Federalist Party? Who is it? Alexander Hamilton. That's right. Good job. Was the Federalist Party in favor of? Well, there's a long list of things. Strong federal government is really important, though. You've got to know that one. Or a weak federal government. Well, they're in favor of a strong federal government. All right. So Democratic Republican Party, the leaders Thomas Jefferson, they wanted stronger states. The states should have the more power, not the federal government. They didn't want a powerful government like under the king. They were afraid that this new powerful government was going to rule them too powerfully and in similar ways to Great Britain. They emphasized agriculture, a rule by the people. They tended to be more pro-French. They believed in state banks, not a national bank, and they were a strict interpretation of the Constitution, which meant that you can do less. The strict interpretation of the Constitution, you see what the Constitution says. If the Constitution says you can do this, you can do it. If it doesn't, then you can't. So if it's not specifically said that you can do this thing, then you shouldn't be doing it. And they believed in free trade, which means they were against protective tariffs. They did not want to put taxes on trade, or they didn't want to put many taxes on trade. Who is leader of the Democratic Republican Party? Thomas Jefferson. That's right. Good job. And was the Democratic Party in favor of Britain or France? France is the answer. All right. Now, political parties. This is another way to think about it. You've got the Federalists, you've got the Democratic Republicans, you've got Hamilton, you've got Jefferson. And then if you think about the power of government, the federal government is more powerful, state government is smaller. When you think of Democratic Republicans, the federal government is got some power that the state government doesn't have, but the state government has most of the power. So if this big circle is the power of the government, federal government has more, state government has less. Democratic Republicans, state government has more, federal government has less. And then you can also see British flag, French flag, agriculture, manufacturing. All right. John Adams is our second president. France is capturing American ships that are going to Britain, and Adams begins to say, anyway, we're not going to get into the XYZ affair too much. Needless to say, it was an issue. They were attacking our shipping. We don't want them to do that. And they were attacking our shipping because we were going to Great Britain, and they were at war with Great Britain. So his party wanted him to declare war, but he didn't. He didn't believe it was time to declare war yet. He thought that wasn't the best thing. And so even though his party suggested he do it, he doesn't do it. And this is an example of what we call civic virtue. In other words, he's doing what's best for the country, not what's best for him politically. All right. Thomas Jefferson ultimately beats John Adams for president the next election. And so Thomas Jefferson becomes the third president of the United States. And we have a peaceful transfer of power from Adams' presidency to Jefferson's presidency. That's two different political parties. That it's a shift in parties, and it's a peaceful transfer of power. There's no problems, there's no fighting, there's no issues going from one to the other. Now, was John Adams happy about it? Absolutely not. He doesn't attend the inauguration for Thomas Jefferson, but he does accept the outcome of the election, and there is no fighting over it. All right. Thomas Jefferson's big ideas here. What does he support? He supports reducing the size of the military, reducing the spending of the government. He believed in laissez-faire policy. In other words, hands off. The government is hands off, doesn't get involved in economic business, doesn't want lots of taxes, doesn't want a lot of different things, doesn't want the government getting involved and picking the winners or losers. This reducing the size of government, reducing spending, those go hand in hand. If you reduce spending, you are reducing the power of your government because your government can only do things by spending. And so if you're spending less money, you're doing fewer things, which is what Jefferson wants. Big key Supreme Court decision during, had a hard time coming up with the word Supreme Court. Big Supreme Court decision during Jefferson's presidency is Marbury versus Madison. I'm not going to go into all the details of it. You can read those your own. But this establishes this principle of judicial review. Judicial review is the right establishing this principle that the Supreme Court can declare laws that are passed by Congress unconstitutional. In other words, if they say it's unconstitutional, then the law is thrown out. That's the power of judicial review. That's established by the precedent set by the Marbury versus Madison case. All right, Gibbons versus Ogden is another important Supreme Court case that ruled the federal government in charge of interstate commerce. In other words, trade between the states. That the federal government can regulate trade between the states. And McCulloch versus Maryland, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government did not have to pay taxes to the states. So state was trying to actually tax the national bank in Maryland. Maryland was trying to tax the national bank. And the federal government says, no, you cannot do that. And the Supreme Court says, you're right, you can't. John Marshall was the Chief Justice, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. No, he was not the first, but he was an important Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he is he really believes in the strengthening the power of the federal government, and his decisions reflected that. Those decisions we just read all really give the federal government power and establish that yes, the federal government has more power than other governments. Than the state governments. Louisiana Purchase also happens during Jefferson's presidency, and it nearly doubles the size of the United States. So here's the United States before the Louisiana Purchase, this orange and blue. Louisiana Purchase is all this green area. There you can see it here as well. And then you can see the United States nearly doubles in size, and it only cost $15 million. All right, British attack Americans. This is a continuing problem, and now ultimately it's going to lead to, ultimately this problem will lead to the War of 1812. In 1807, this is happening. A British ship attacked the U.S. ship, the Chesapeake, and killed 3 Americans. British ships have been boarding American shipping and taking sailors and pressing them or forcing them into the British Navy, and the United States is none too happy about this. Jefferson responds with the Embargo Act. An Embargo Act is where you stop trade with all other nations. So we stop trading with everybody. Ultimately, the goal here is to hurt Great Britain because they trade with us a lot, but ultimately it hurts the United States at least as much, if not more, and it is a failure. America's economy goes into shambles at this time, especially their trade, obviously, and it upsets many people that are involved. It ruins their livelihoods. These businesses that their job is trade, well, they're going broke really fast. James Madison becomes president in 1809. He's elected in 1808, becomes president in 1809, and this problem of British and French attacking American shipping continues. In 1811, the U.S. wins a battle called the Battle of Tippecanoe against some Native Americans that are rising up. Tecumseh is rising up against Americans that are moving further out into their territory. He's the leader of the Native American Confederation of different tribes, but the U.S. wins this major battle. As a result of this, Native Americans begin to join forces with the British, and ultimately this is what helps to lead to the War of 1812, along with the attacking of American shipping. So these two things in combination help to lead to the War of 1812. Whereas war hawks are Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. They're ready to go to war, declare war on Great Britain. Congress quadruples the size of the army, and Madison decides to declare war on Britain. Great Britain is actually surprised by this. American forces tried to invade Canada, unsuccessful. In retaliation, the British burned Washington, D.C. Many battles took place on the Great Lakes, the greatest one being the Battle of Lake Erie, which was won by the United States. This is also when the Star-Spangled Banner is written by Francis Scott Key as he's watching the bombardment of Fort McHenry. The song is now our national anthem. The war ends with the Treaty of Ghent. There's no boundaries change, but the British would agree to stop seizing American ships. Well, the reason they really actually what they do is they say everything goes back to the way it was before the war. Well, the thing is, before the war, Great Britain was at war with France. And so they were attacking our ships that were going to France because they didn't want us trading with France. Well, by the time the war ends, they're not at war with France anymore. And so they have no reason to attack our ships. And so Andrew Jackson had not heard the war had ended in New Orleans. He's the general there at New Orleans, ready to defend New Orleans from British attack. The British hadn't heard it yet either, and so they attack, and Andrew Jackson wins this famous Battle of New Orleans after the war has actually been is over, but they don't know it yet. The effects of the war: America has earned respect around the world. Americans become very patriotic and proud of their country and not just their state. And this it leads to an increase in American manufacturing. James Monroe is elected the next president. This leads to the era of good feelings, and Americans were happy after the War of 1812, and James Monroe is easily elected to be the 5th president of the U.S. This is a period of the era of good feelings. It's also called nationalism. And one of the most significant things that happens during Monroe's presidency is the Monroe Doctrine, and basically saying, hey, Europe, all these countries that have gained independence from you over here, your colonies, you cannot come over here and try to recolonize the Americas. We are closed to European colonization. Don't come back and try to get your old colonies that you've lost. This would be especially directed at Spain and France, but certainly Great Britain and any other colonizer from Europe. And so that is where we are going to end our review for today.